How are y'all doing? Good. Well, I get the wonderful opportunity to come and kind of wrap up this series that we're in. And let me just start off with just this thought. When you look at our world, don't you have that feeling that our world needs leaders maybe more than like just ever before? Things that are going on in church, world, everything. And yeah, they do. That's you clap for that. And I want to talk about that. And you know, the other thing is that when you look at Christ and what he did more than just present a good idea, right? He came more than just to promote an idea about something. Jesus came to lead a movement that would have a profound effect on the church, because the world needs it, doesn't it? For more than a couple of centuries in Africa and a few parts of Latin America, there was a terrible scourge. It was this little bitty fly. They didn't figure this out until like 1926, but there was this little bitty fly that carried a larva. And when it would bite someone, oftentimes it would leave a little bit of that larva in there, and that larva would become this micro worm that would multiply again and again and again and again. And it created terrible itching and rashes in people all throughout this huge band within Central Africa. But worst of all, it ended up creating blindness. And it's known as river blindness. And some of you may have heard of it. And it was this terrible scourge on so much of Africa with so many people that there would be whole villages where all of the adults had already gone blind. And if you've ever seen pictures of this, it'll be little kids and they have this stick that's maybe 5 feet long, and they're leading the adults around because there's no adults that even have sight. And when they figured out it was this little fly, they tried to combat it with pesticides and killing the flies and draining ponds and stuff, but this particular fly was able to set up nests or whatever on running water, and so it just went on and on and on until in the early 1970s there was a pharmaceutical researcher by the name of Campbell who had actually developed a drug for horses and cows here in the United States for a similar kind of parasite over here, and suddenly he realized the breakthrough in that drug might be something that could actually lead to a breakthrough in ending river blindness. It could be a cure for this. And it was this fantastic idea. I mean, a purpose-filled idea. Millions, literally millions of people had gone blind, most of which their lives were ended early because of other complications because of this thing. And it was just this marvelous thing. The CEO of Merck, where this guy worked, a great guy, but it became this daunting thing. You have this great idea, but you realize this great idea, it's just an idea. If no one mobilizes behind it, organizes, moves it forward, if no one raises up leaders and aligns them and points them in a direction and solves the problems, it's just an idea about a pill that actually doesn't cure anybody. And the CEO looked at it and just said, man, probably cost $200 million, take 10 years to develop the drug. We're going to do it in a region where it's made up of more than 35 countries, most of which have no infrastructure. They have no pharmacies. The people there don't know how to handle pharmaceutical medicines. There's not even roads to most of these villages. How would we even begin even how to distribute it? And how do you talk stockholders in your company into investing 10 years and $200 million to make a pill that the people who need it can't buy it? But they said, you know what? We got to do this. And the CEO realized that we don't even have the means to do all. We can make the pill, but we don't have the know-how. We don't work with all these countries. And so many other efforts, humanitarian efforts, have failed in so many of these countries because of corruption and lack of infrastructure. But here's what the CEO of Merck did that was so unlike some of the other efforts before him. He started raising up leaders. He started raising up leaders in all of these countries and casting this kind of vision to them. He started raising up leaders within the pharmaceutical industry that would begin working on this and trying to fast track. He started raising up leaders amongst his stockholders that would have a vision for what this is. And less than 10 years later, the first pill rolled off that little conveyor belt, and they actually had an infrastructure and a way to start getting the pill to the people who needed it the most. And now, some 20 years after the fact, river blindness is all but gone in the world. And it happened, okay, because there was a profound, purpose-filled idea that didn't just stay as a purpose-filled idea. Because if it just stayed as a purpose-filled idea, then it's just good intentions, but it doesn't cure anybody. It became a purpose-filled idea connected to leadership. And the combination of those two things moved something forward. It was absolutely fabulous. Now, when you think of Christ, most people think of Christ and maybe his skill sets, what he did. You know, they talk about great teacher, a humanitarian, a man who ministered. He was the Messiah, the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace. We think of all of these things. But you know, have you ever noticed that oftentimes, especially in the secular world, we don't often think of Christ as a great leader? You know, in so many ways, he really was. In fact, even if you say, I don't even know that I believe he was the Son of God. But boy, is it hard to argue that he wasn't maybe one of the most influential leaders in the world. Because he moved his ideas in ways that are still affecting the world. And I want you to look at what he did and how he did it. Here, he starts with this amazing idea, right? He comes into the world, and we live in a world where sin reigns. We live in a world where there's pain and suffering. We live in a world where bad things happen, where people are distant from God, and just all of this. And so he comes into the world with this profound idea. If you have your Bibles, flip with me to the Gospel of Mark. And I want us to look at how he starts his ministry. Gospel of Mark. It says this. Look at verse 14. After John was put in prison, that was John the Baptist, after John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee proclaiming the good news of God. And now this is going to be this idea, this profound, redeeming idea. And here it is, and it's just the gospel. The time has come, he said. The kingdom of God is near. In other words, life with God is available. People who were separated from God because of their failures, people who didn't know God, couldn't connect with him, didn't understand spiritual things, all of that, the ability to have life with God for all eternity is now available. And this is so profound. He goes on and he says, repent and believe the good news. Simply embrace it is what he's saying. To repent is to just stop basing your life on whatever you based it before, and now base your life on the person of Jesus Christ. That is it. What a purpose-filled concept or idea, a piece of truth that is maybe more valuable and needed, right, than any other truth. There is not a purpose-filled idea that has ever come into the world before or since that is more precious or valuable to the world than that. But you understand, if it stays as just the gospel message, it will change very few lives. And so what Jesus does is he takes this purpose-filled idea. It is the gospel message that God, through Jesus Christ, has made a way for you and me to have a relationship with him. And now Jesus wants to turn this into a movement. And what does he do? What is the very next thing Jesus does? Look back at the passage. Look at verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen of men. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. All of a sudden, the first thing he does, he casts this vision for this incredible idea. And now the very thing he does is he starts raising up leaders that now can create movement behind the gospel message. He is raising up people that are ultimately going to be the ones that are going to start the church. He is raising up people that will actually take this message to people in a way that they will take it, embrace it, and become followers of God. And he does this again and again. Look how he's raising up his leadership team that's going to launch this whole thing. Look at verse 19. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, his brother John, in a boat, preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. And he just goes on and on. He starts calling all of these people to him. And these people are the ones that are going to be the leaders that are going to move this. And it's such a diverse group of people. It's interesting what he does with this. He gets these fishermen, then he goes on and he gets Matthew, who is what? A tax collector, right? Kind of a different background than fishing. We know he goes on, he gets guys like Luke, who was a doctor. He gets a guy by the name of Simon, known as Simon the Zealot, which is kind of an indicator to us in the language that he was a political figure. And to be a zealot was to be a part of a political party that was just emphatic against their stance against Rome, in particular the taxes that Rome was doing and the pressure they were putting on them. And Jesus calls this guy, says, man, you've got some skill sets that I want to bring into this thing. And you think about the diversity that he brings in with all of these different people. You know, he's got Matthew and Simon the Zealot. It's kind of like he's got, you know, a Tea Party leader and an IRS agent. You guys get to room together, kind of thing. You know, and he does this. He goes on, and we know that he was recruiting other followers that maybe weren't apostles or disciples, but we know that they were very much a part of this early leadership movement. He selects women to be leaders within his group and to do some things. And I want to give you just one example of that. You may be thinking of some examples, but there's one that we don't often think of, found over in Luke chapter 8. Her name is Joanna. And here's what it says. And he goes through this list of women that were followers of Christ. And he gets down to verse 3. Chapter 8, verse 3. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Now just pause there for a second. Jesus recruits the wife of the guy who was managing all of Herod's household affairs and everything, right? The guy who's trying to kill Jesus, the guy who hates Jesus, the guy who's been trying to chase him down. And lo and behold, Herod doesn't realize it, but he's helping to finance Jesus in his efforts. I just find that very humorous. I think that's a little of God's humor. But he goes on and enlists some of these other women, and they were like stockholders in what Jesus was doing. They were backing and funding them so that this effort could move forward. And Jesus did all this. And what you see in this is this kind of bandwidth of leadership, of different skill sets, different backgrounds, different things that we don't always think of. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it's important for us to ponder when we think about the church. Because maybe for like the last 100 years or so, we have narrowed our understanding of what leadership is in a church context. Oftentimes, we have this picture of a leader of the church. Well, it's that pastor guy, right? And he primarily teaches. That's when I see him the most. He's teaching. And without realizing it, and this is my observation, I just make an observation that I've seen after decades of being a pastor, is that oftentimes in the context of the church, we confuse teaching skills and roles with leadership roles and skills. Oftentimes, churches will end up recruiting people into leadership roles, and what they don't realize is oftentimes we recruit teachers into those leadership roles. We ask teachers to kind of bear that burden. And you know what? Some teachers have great leadership skills. There's a lot of people that kind of have both of those skill sets that God has given them. Other times they don't. And the net effect is, I think, too often we overload teachers and we ask them to take a brunt of something, and we end up overloading them, burning them out, asking them in some cases to do things that just kind of aren't in their skill set and kind of be frustrating. All the while, we, without realizing it, we'll have leaders that are kind of sidelined. And I've experienced a lot of leaders that are profound leaders in the marketplace, in the social sector, in the business world. And they come to church, and because they have this kind of narrow view of leadership as being maybe a teaching role, or oftentimes a kind of a pastoral role, that they just say, I'm not the guy that goes and prays for someone when they're sick, because I'm awkward in there, and I always say things that make them feel worse than better, and it's just not me. And oftentimes, I'll notice leaders who just believe this, I don't see where what I'm good at is transferable in my church. And I gotta tell you, I just don't think that's true. I think we need all of it. We need all the gifts. We need teachers, and we need leaders within the church. And Paul talks about this. Just real quickly, flip with me over to the book of Romans, chapter 12. Kind of a classic passage on this. Romans chapter 12. here's what Paul says about this. Look at verse 6. We have different gifts according to the grace given to us. And it's just, and there are a lot of other gifts other than teaching and leadership, right? There's administration and helps and prophecy. There's just a ton of gifts and spiritual gifts and skill sets and talents. And he rolls through this, verse 7. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. And you know, we need teachers in the church now. In fact, teaching is a really important role within the church. Because teachers give substance and they give depth. They give meaning to those ideas. We need teachers. Teachers, they bring life to Scripture in applicable ways that is just beautiful and rich. If we didn't have teachers throughout our church, then, you know, whatever we did would oftentimes just be really shallow. We need teachers. But I've also noticed this, right? And if you're a teacher, and I can say this because that you know, that's part of what I do and can do. Oftentimes teachers, we love to make things, right? We like lots of things central. Teachers, as they teach, you know, they're teaching on one subject over here, man, they pull people into this, man, this is great, man. Maybe, you know, like in the book of Revelation, man, there's all this stuff to look at, and we start thinking about world politics and what's going on in the world, and when is Jesus going to come back, and, you know, premillennialist, postmillennial, and all that great stuff. And then, you know, the next minute, then you're teaching on something out of the Old Testament, man, and boy, you get into that. And the next thing you know, like, all things become kind of central. And the problem with that, when you're trying to move something forward, if all things become central, you can end up with a church that's trying to do a million different things, only all of them are done just kind of in a mediocre way, okay? Nothing against teachers, because we need what they do. And we need what people do that serve, encourage, all of that stuff. See? But he goes on, look what else he says. He drops down and he says, if it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. And what he's saying is, man, you need teachers, but you also need leaders. You need leaders to lead diligently, to move things forward. And one of the things about leaders is they can take substance. They can take the meaning of what teachers teach, and they can give it focus. They can give it alignment. Leaders have a way of saying all things aren't equal and all things shouldn't be equal. Because if all things become equal, then everything, you know, is mediocre. But if you want movement, you have to focus. And leaders can do that. Leaders can read the values. They take the substance, oftentimes, of what teachers teach, and they move it forward. That's why churches need teachers and leaders. That's why I always cringe when I hear pastors talking about, you know, well, we're going to be a church that's more of a teaching church, or we're going to be a church that's more of a leadership kind of church. You're like, you know, you need both. You need both. And I want us to be a church that has both. And I got to tell you, so here this morning, I've got kind of an agenda with what I want to do here this morning. Because I know that one of the things that happens in churches, and including our church, is without realizing it, we can leave too many leaders sidelined throughout the organization of the church. Because we have that narrow definition of what it is. So I want to do this. I want to walk through some of the leaders that Jesus recruited and that Jesus used. I had like 10 of them that I wanted to talk through, and I realized if I walk through all 10 of these different leaders, and kind of their different bent, their different style, it'd be an 80-minute sermon, and that's not very focused, and no one wants to be here for an 80-minute sermon. So I'm going to just leave it at 3, okay? But let me say, there's so many different types of leaders that we see in the New Testament that Jesus recruited. And the first one I want to talk about here is John. And as I talk about these different leaders, these 3 different leaders, here's my agenda with this, is that maybe some of you here are going to identify with some of this. Some of you here are going to say, oh my goodness, that's me. That's what I do in the marketplace. That's what I do in the office. That's what I do in the social sector. That's what I do out at the plant. And that I would hope that some of you that maybe just feel like, I don't know what I have to offer this church, maybe would look at this and you'd find yourself getting sparked a little bit. You'd get amped up over something, say, I can do that. And that you would actually find yourself getting a little excited about saying, maybe there is something I can do in this church to lead and help move this body of believers forward in some way, okay? So as I talk through this, my whole point of this is for you to understand it, but also to get some of you at the place where you would identify with this and say, I'm that kind of leader, that's me. And there's a mixture of different types and this sort of thing, but let's start with John here. John is what I would call maybe a visionary or inspirational kind of leader. John in his writings, and of course John was also a teacher, beautiful teacher, but he was also a great leader. He did so much to move the early church forward. And he did it through inspiring vision. He did things that inspired people. He did things that helped people focus and narrow and understand what was central. Fascinating thing about John, he understood the centrality and the supremacy of love that Jesus taught. You know, Jesus taught all this stuff, but there is clearly something that trumps all things in the teachings of Christ. And it is the supremacy of love. Jesus even at one point says, you can hang all the commands, all the prophets, all of it hangs on love God, love others. It's central. John got that. And so in the writings of John, you see the centrality of love as it needs to be the part of every single church. In fact, of all the great passages on love, that, you know, the kind of passages you paint on a board and hang on your wall or something, or crochet and, you know, hang on your wall, maybe all of them but one. Paul's got one like in 2 Corinthians 13. Other than that one, all the great passages of love come from John. I mean, all the authors talk about love, but John puts him in this visionary, you know, he's the one that writes, you know, for God so loved the world, right? Who doesn't know that verse? In his epistles, you know, he's the one that talks about love, the love of God that drives out all fear. And he keeps coming back to this. And as he's leading these different churches, he keeps bringing these churches back to this thing, like, guys, whatever you do, whatever you achieve, if love isn't the end result of it, then you've lost it. And he narrows it. He brings them to this place where they get what this is all about. It's interesting what he does with the book of Revelation. You know, we think about the book of Revelation, and if you're a teacher, right, it either scares you to death, or it's just like a playground of things to teach. Right? There's all this stuff in there, and you do all this stuff. Have you ever thought about this? The book of John wasn't, the book of Revelation wasn't written by John just so we would just like be able to go, you know, gaga over all of these different fascinating things, right? It has that, and it's wonderful. Did you ever stop to think that maybe part of what John was trying to do when he wrote the book of Revelation was to create some movement? He was speaking to churches in a culture that was like hardwired against everything it was to be a Christian. He was speaking to people that were being persecuted, beat up. It just seemed like nobody wanted to follow them at, you know, at these different junctures. And he writes the book of Revelation as a book to inspire them, to move them forward. He gives them a picture that in the end, there is a spiritual world behind the scenes that we don't easily see, and here is the end result, right? You can sum up Revelation in one short sentence. God wins. Right? God wins. No matter what you face in this world, God wins. Don't give up. You keep moving forward. He was inspiring them in this moment. Ever have a moment where you feel like, oh man, the very culture I live in, my neighborhood, my workplace, what I see going on, it just feels like everything is hardwired against my church succeeding, hardwired against what it means to be a Christian. All of these things. Ever feel like that? Well, yeah, because that's a lot of cultures. You know what leaders that are visionary leaders do? They give you hope. They give you a picture of moving forward. They solidify things. They let you know what is most important. They keep us focused and moving forward. And maybe that's the kind of leader you are. Maybe you're the leader that, the values of where you work, man, you think about the value. If 8 people come through the lobby of your office, you're the gal that always reads the mission statement hanging on the wall. It's like, oh, I gotta read that one time. I love mission statements, because that's how you're wired. You want to know what's most important. You can't work on a project at work unless you feel like this project, what I'm working on here, is ultimately driving my organization to that one place. And you're the one that when you sit in a meeting, you want to have that sense that, Sue and Betty working on this thing over here is still driving to the same place you're doing. And that person in the department down the hallway, what they're doing is working. You're a leader, and you want the salespeople to feel like they're driving in the same direction that the people that are making whatever it is the salespeople are selling. Because the values and the direction are so important to you. And you find yourself in a meeting, right? You're in the meeting and somebody's talking about some project and you're going, what does this have to do with our mission? What does this have to do with the values? It's a great idea, but who cares? Because it doesn't have anything to do with our values. And that's the kind of leader that you are. You live out of it. That was John. If it's not, if love isn't central to what's happening, John would be frustrated. You know what? If that's you, if you find yourself getting aggravated over those things, if you find yourself, giving that vision for what your work is about, you're a leader that we need in this church. We need leaders like John in this church. If that's you, we need it all through the organization. We need leaders working in the children's area. We need leaders working in our guest area. When we welcome people, right? We don't want the people that work in our welcome ministry coming in. We don't want them just saying, well, it's just, I just hand them this thing and shake their hand because that's the job. No, we need a visionary leader that understands, the reason we welcome people at this church is because we are a great commanded, great commission kind of church. We're a church. And those new people walking in, they matter. They matter. They might be hurting. They might feel far from God. They may have just had the worst week of their life. And for the first time ever in their life, they're turning to God. And God brought them on our campus. And what we want to do in that moment is make sure that there is a smile, a handshake, a look, eye to eye, that communicates the deepest values of what we feel about them and what we want them to experience in this room. And if you're that kind of leader, see, you'll want that alignment. Visionary leaders know that unity within a church and an organization matters. And we need leaders that remind us of the importance of unity. That if we lose unity in our church, then great things don't happen. If we lose unity, we start bickering about stupid stuff. We get upset about things that we shouldn't be upset about. We take our eye off the ball, what God has called us to. We need leaders in every ministry around here that are visionary leaders that keep us focused and unified in a vision for what we're doing. We need you. Another kind of leader that we see that Jesus recruited that I just absolutely love is Barnabas. Remember Barnabas? And here's Barnabas. He's really not a teacher, right? We don't have really, I don't think, any record of any place where Barnabas is teaching. But man, Barnabas was a guy that helped move the church forward. And maybe the skill set that we see most in Barnabas is he is what I would call like a developer, a people developer. Right? Barnabas was this guy that would pull people in and he would let them realize their potential. The person that other people were willing to leave behind, he's like, no, that guy's got game, right? We're going to pull this person in. They just need some developing and look out what they can do. In the early church, there was a guy by the name of John Mark who was kind of floundering a little bit in his ministry. He got overwhelmed and just was kind of ready to give up. In fact, they talked about using him, and Paul was like, no, wait, we're not using John Mark. I mean, he had nothing but bad things to say about John Mark. But you know who looked at John Mark and said, no. This guy's got potential. This guy has a place as a leader, a profound leader in moving the church forward, was Barnabas. And Barnabas said, Paul, tough. I'm taking this guy under my wing and we're moving forward. And you know what? John Mark goes on to be one of the great leaders within the early church, even to the point that Paul acknowledges this. And you know what's even more ironic? When Paul becomes a Christian, what do all the Christians think about Paul when he becomes a Christian? Get away from that guy. Because, he's been arresting Christians, throwing them in jail, persecuting them. They want to stay as far away from Paul as possible. But it is Barnabas who says, you know what? this guy, he's got some horsepower. And if we can find a way to harness that, if what he's saying is true, the potential for what that could mean to the church is unbelievable. And Barnabas becomes the one guy who says, I'll go get this Paul guy and take a chance and develop some potential in this guy. And he does. Can you imagine if Barnabas wouldn't have been there? If there wouldn't have been a leader like Barnabas that said, I want to pull this guy in. Paul might be nothing more than a simple footnote at the bottom of a commentary about a radical Pharisee who became a Christian. And instead, Paul is the guy that moved the church and the Gentile regions forward like no one else. See? Maybe you're here and you go, oh my gosh, I love development. Right? I see that young person coming to the office. I see their passion. You know, man, maybe they don't have a lot of skills, but I see the potential. I know what they need. Maybe you see that person and you're just like, man, they've got all these skills, but their attitude keeps just stinking up the place. And I know this person's going to get fired, but I'm going to come alongside. I'm going to come alongside that person and maybe have the hard conversation or the tender conversation and just help develop them so that they've got the potential to become something great. Maybe it's that person you look at, man, they've got all the skill sets and they've got the right heart, but they're just timid, right? They just need someone to come alongside them and develop them and help them understand what they can do to go the next level. And when we have leaders that say, I'm going to look for other people and other leaders, and I'm going to help make good leaders into great leaders that have the right heart, the right skills, and know what to do, man, that's invaluable. That is invaluable. And maybe you find yourself doing that at work because it's just your heart. You know, you do it behind the boss's back. You know, the boss is all like, that guy there, and you're like, I'm just going to secretly do it. I've had people do that to me. I've had people that I'm just like, no way. And then, you know, someone on staff goes and gets that burden to them. I'm like, wow, you know? Because you can't help but see the potential in people. Man, do we need that around this place. We need volunteer leaders that are small group leaders, connect group leaders, ABF leaders, that see the potential in other people and say, that person could be the next great teacher at this church. That person over there could be the next great leader for our students. That person right there, man, they could take this ministry to the next level. And you want to develop. We need you. We need you developing people. Because it's what you do as a leader. One last one, and that's Paul. And of course, we think of Paul, a great teacher, but also a great leader, and the stuff he did. And when you think of Paul, we don't often think of Paul as the warm, fuzzy guy, do we? Right? You know, he seems like, and he's, you know. But it's interesting. And I don't think he was a warm, fuzzy guy, okay? But, boy, was he a relational leader. When you read through the New Testament, one of the things that will strike you is there is no New Testament author that uses personal names more than Paul. Paul has built personal relationships with people all over the known world. I mean, these are people that he went and cultivated. He opens up so many of his books with things like, you know, my dear Titus, man, I miss you. I mean, you know, Priscilla and Aquila, oh man, I think about the stuff that you did. And I'm not going to take the time to read it here, but he says some things about Timothy where he just says, you know, I can't wait to come and see you because I want to encourage you and I want to be encouraged by you. And it's just so relational in what he does. And there's something about Paul that he understands the power behind relational capital. He understands that one of the profound things that every leader has to do at any level is that oftentimes we are asking people to go and do things they will not do on their own. Right? You live in a church environment, leaders are always asking people to risk vulnerability, to tackle issues, to be bold, to do things and go places, to live a kind of life that we often would never do on our own. And it is leaders who ask us to go to those places. And Paul understands that sometimes it is the credibility that comes through a personal relationship that is sometimes the only thing that has enough power to lead somebody to one of those places. And Paul understands it. And so he builds all of these relationships. There's one point when he's writing to Timothy, and he's giving Timothy kind of some correction. I talked about that focus thing about, just here's what we're about. He's giving Timothy some of that advice. In fact, he says, Timothy, you got people in your church. That's found in 1 Timothy chapter 1. And he's saying, Timothy, you got people in your church that, man, they're trying to teach some things, and it's going off this direction, and he goes, you know what? They don't know as much as they think they know. And it's your job to pull them together, to be focused, to have potency. It's interesting. It comes back to this thing. He says, the ultimate law that we live by here is love. And you got to pull them together and do that. You know how Paul does that? Because Timothy's a high-level leader. He does it because he had the relationship to do that. Timothy trusted and honored Paul and would allow Paul to say those things to him. And maybe you're the leader and you find yourself, I'm the guy, I'm the gal at work. I build those relationships. I understand how relational capital works. I understand those moments where it's a tough conversation. And I know what it means to build trust and credibility, to have integrity in a way that connects with other people so that I can lead them. And I can lead them in those moments where I know it's a place that they won't easily go, but it's where we've got to go. See, you can have those conversations about unity and direction. Those conversations about searching your soul. Because you've built the credibility. And if that's you, if you do that naturally out in the marketplace, the place of business, you know what? Oh my gosh, we need that too. A church is a relational organization, right? If any organization on the planet is relational by nature, it's the church. And relational capital is so valuable. Having leaders move us forward through the power of those relationships is such a beautiful. We need you all throughout the organization around you. So now, I'm going to just end with this challenge to any of you who maybe are saying, I think I probably have some leadership skills. I see it in the marketplace. Maybe I didn't really see it in the church. Would you describe, I don't know exactly where that would be, but I kind of resonated. I got excited when you talked about, Barnabas or something. If that's you, I want to invite you to come to a reception. Because you know what? We need leaders in this church. And too many churches have too many of their leaders sidelined. And I don't want to be that church. And I know we need them. I know we need leaders more than ever. So here's what I want to do. I want to just invite you to come to a reception. I just want to meet you. I want to rub shoulders with you for a little while, share a little bit about my heart, about leadership and what's going on around here. I want you to meet some of the other kind of high-octane leaders that we've got around here and just see what happens out of it. Because I know it's hard to just blindly place leaders. You got to start somewhere. I just want to get a bunch of you in the room and talk about leadership, rub shoulders, give you a chance to meet me a little bit. I want to meet you and just see what God begins to do out of that. And maybe we can begin infusing more and more leaders with all the other people and all their other gifts around here. Because we don't want to just be a church that has a great idea about what churches can do. We want to be the church that actually does something that is great and profound for the kingdom of God. That's what we do. Now, I'm going to close this in prayer here in a moment, but if you are new, I'm going to just pause here and say, if you're new, we have what we call the 10-minute party over here, and I would love to meet you. Some of our pastors will be back there. We've got some refreshments back there, and you are more than welcome to just make your way back there and join us for a little bit back there. Why don't you stand, and you'll notice you probably all got a little card.